The issues, in broad terms, we all know, there are fantastic opportunities from resource wealth, but countries have failed on the whole, or countries have found it remarkably difficult to make good use of that resource wealth. When I think about that, I think there are two distinct sorts of reasons why countries have found it so difficult to make use of resource wealth well. One set of reasons is to do with the fact that there are just lots of ways to get it wrong. If you think of the process of extracting resources and using the revenue effectively, and as you look at how it's done in different countries, the experience of various case studies, you see things going wrong at many, many stages of the process. And let's think it through. The fiscal regime, the contracting with companies, how do you make sure that the government actually extracts a good proportion of the revenues? That's difficult. We know African countries that have had very little benefit, and certainly other countries that have wanted to renegotiate and successfully renegotiated the terms. So right there at the beginning, extracting the revenues is difficult. Getting the revenues legally to actually end up in government coffers is difficult in many places. One thinks of the DRC now, where regimes are in place, but obviously not implemented, not enforced. There's the terrible difficulty of managing volatility. Volatility has a very adverse effect on economic performance, and obviously resource commodity price fluctuations are a major driver of volatility. Spending effectively is very, very difficult. Example I sometimes give, I come from a country, I was part of a government economic service of some 2,500 economists, and we're not very good at spending effectively. So countries with very much smaller cadres of government economists surely find it hard. And then, of course, the response of the economy to having the resource wealth, the Dutch disease, difficulties in diversification, all these issues. So my point there is that as you look at the detail, there are very, very many places where things can go wrong and things have gone wrong in different countries.
In the Growth Commission, we looked at countries that had done something quite extraordinary, and that is to grow at 7% or more a year. This is very high rates for a period on average of 25 years or more. It turns out in the history of the world, and it's all the post-war world, there are 13 countries that have done that. It is extremely hard to do. Botswana is one of them. Botswana is one of the very few countries that's managed to do this, and it is built on a foundation of political leadership, vision, ethics, and values that are shared, and a strategy that evolved over time but that worked. And that's a general principle. That engagement with the business community, with labor unions, with the electorate, with civil society organizations, that's the underpinning of all of this, is largely ignored in economic discussions, but it turns out, at least in our judgment, was crucial. Now, turning to the economics, I mean, there are essentially four key elements of a strategy that engages, that allows this kind of sustained high growth and poverty reduction that have been talked about so well by the previous speakers. One is engagement with the global economy, with all the risks that that entails, with the risks that we're now more intensely aware of than we perhaps were before. And that involves imparting knowledge and taking advantage of the vast market. The second Tony mentioned, this kind of growth can't be sustained without very high levels of investment and saving. We estimated that one had to get the investment and savings rate up to 25% or more of the GDP and hold it there. And of that 25%, 5 to 7% had to be public sector investment in infrastructure. Human capital, obviously, would be the single most important element. And I'm going to come back to that. The third is allowing what I call the microeconomic dynamics of creative destruction to work. And this is the really hard part of that, and do it in such a way that you protect people who get sideswiped by that dynamics. You know, jobs are created, jobs are destroyed. the economy's diversifying, industries come into existence and then vanish, and so on. People don't like that for the very best of reasons, but that is the engine that is driven by the private sector, by investment, by entrepreneurs, and sustaining that environment and not sticking wheels in the spokes turns out to be important. And finally, maintaining a kind of stability, both political and macroeconomic, is important because instability is highly destructive of investment. It just introduces risk and eventually turns things down. Now let me do a calculation as a preamble to saying why I thought this effort in natural resources and a number of others like them are so important. So I asked myself the question, I wish I'd put this in the growth report. Suppose that using the resources, the revenue flow, to the state from natural resource wealth, a government managed to take its public sector investment levels from about 3% of GDP, which is very normal. It's extremely hard to commit resources to long-term things when the per capita income's in the range of $300 a year. And suppose that produced an increment in private sector investment and kicked it up into the range I've been talking about at 25%. Well, I won't take you through the details, but if you net out the investment and ask what's the internal rate of return on the flow of consumption, that is the things that people actually, eat and use, the answer is 19%. That's not bad. That's not bad. 19%. Not all of us have a chance to invest and produce returns of 19%.
Nigeria is the classical example of a failure, a complete opposite of Botswana, not Sierra Leone, really. Nigeria is an example of a country that literally destroyed itself by these God-given natural resources. I, as an individual, had a chance when we got sort of support from the international community through Financial Action Task Force to create a sort of environment for management and address of money laundering issues. I implemented the FATF provisions in Nigeria. Through that, for example, I tried to do something at the industry. I single-handedly got literally about 40 tankers stolen crude oil from Nigeria. I single-handedly brought about 5 of the governors in the Niger Delta to justice. I single-handedly ended up being dismissed and removed and also survived an assassination attack. This is the challenge of what is going on ground. It's a big problem, and it is a problem, I can assure you, to do with leadership. Leadership that is not allowing any good thing to take place. Most of these things are there. I want, if the world will recognize the fact that the challenge today in countries like Nigeria and so many others is that of leadership. Leadership is so fundamental. Unless we are able to get the Magais of this world, so many of them around, that will be able to critically to make a difference around. For example, if you can get a Magai in Nigeria, chances are Sierra Leone, Liberia, Niger will probably not be what they went through. I hope that this charter is going to make these leaders understand that there is need for them to change and hopefully move their own people forward.
Telegrama!
When business and trade works in conflict with human rights, they do not contribute to peace. Neither when trade and business is violating the climate. The same goes when business and trade is based on corruption, bribes, and forced labor. These are all forms of business which break down trust and cooperation instead of building it. And without trust, you will have no peace. In this section, you will hear more about this topic, firstly in a presentation of the Eastern view given by Mr. Lang Yong-tu, and thereafter the Western view by Mr. Kjell Magne Bondevik.